I'll go ahead and give you control.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you once more for joining us. So this is Rocio over at SACNY. We have our last some webinar for the series, Product Responsibility Focus on Apparel, for this Product Safety Awareness Program. Our presenter, Lardner-Stone, will be presenting again. And again, thank you so much for joining us for this last part. Webinars 1, 2, and 3 are available on our YouTube channel if you guys are interested in looking at those. And I'm going to go pass everything over to you. Thank you for joining us again.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to present.
Okay.
Just going to set my screen up to go. Hang on one second.
All right, yes, I see your screen now. So, and if anyone has any questions during the webinar, please feel free to ask them. You can type them in the question window pane, and I'll go ahead and ask and pass on the questions that you guys have.
Perfect. Well then, we're going to get started because I'm going to cover a lot, but if you've been on these presentations with me before, you know I tend to talk probably a little too fast, so I'm confident we'll get through it in time. One thing I did was I did change the subject a little bit, so we're going to address apparel, but we're going to address all the other product categories as well. And if you recall, this is part of our Product Safety Aware program. So to do business through PPAI channels beginning at Expo East in just about 2 weeks now, we are going to require anyone who wants to do business through PPAI channels to become product safety aware by completing 4 hours of product safety training, Product Safety 101, Prop 65 and state regs, undue influence, and then an elective. And this session qualifies as your elective. And hopefully you'll also find it pretty valuable and you'll learn something. And if not, let me know, because I'm always looking for ways to improve on the quality of the content we deliver. So the first thing I need to do, as always, is to remind everyone that this is not legal advice. This is for educational and informational purposes only. So if you have specific questions that relate to your business, it's really important that you seek appropriate counsel. So as I said, I expanded the presentation a little bit. So we're going to cover apparel, writing instruments, electronics, luggage and bags, health and safety products, and drinkware, because those are really the biggest product categories for our industry, and I want to make sure that you're as up to speed as possible on kind of just an overview of the obligations associated with each. So let's start with apparel, because apparel is the biggest product category in our industry. When you're talking about apparel, the things to keep in mind are the size of the shirt, the imprint on the shirt, tracking labels, and drawstrings. And I'll cover each of these 4 elements one after another. The first one, size is important when it comes to apparel. If it's an adult size, treat it as an adult garment. If it's a youth size, treat it as a children's garment. That's really the easiest way to consider it. And when we look at the shirts, the vast majority of sales as it relates to apparel are adult size garments. And that's an important consideration because when it comes to adult size garments, you really don't have very much to be concerned about at all. And the garment in its undecorated state is usually just fine because you're sourcing it from a supplier who knows what they're doing. They have a lot of resources at hand to make sure that the products they're selling into the promotional products marketplace are compliant with all the standards. So when you're talking the undecorated shirt, you just want to look at it if it's an adult size, treat it as an adult garment, and if it's a youth size, treat it as a children's garment. One of the things I say a lot is, you know, if you're doing, say, a 5K, and the vast majority of the participants in the 5K are going to be adults, and there might be a few kids scattered in, well then source your shirts so that they're, you know, extra small to whatever the biggest size you need, and then avoid even entering into adding children's sizes into it by avoiding all the youth sizes entirely. And you should be good. Now it's different if you're selling to, you know, a vacation Bible school or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or an elementary school field day, because then you have to tackle everything that relates to CPSIA. So for the garment in general, exercise due care, and you'll be in good shape. The specific challenge when it comes to apparel, because the sizing makes it easy, there's no gray area. You know if it's an adult product or a children's product. The challenges come in when you're adding the imprint. Because when you're adding the imprint, all of a sudden, if you're a distributor, you're taking on the role of a manufacturer because you're making a material change to the product. So while the undecorated shirt might be just fine, by adding the imprint and the decorative material, you could change the shirt. You could add elements to the shirt that could move it from being in compliance to out of compliance if, for example, you worked with a screen printer that somehow was using ink that had lead in it. And that did happen. There was a recall of shirts. The shirts themselves were manufactured they were made in Mexico. They were shipped to Canada. A Canadian screen printer decorated them. The end buyer tested those shirts, and they discovered higher levels of lead than what was acceptable in the imprint, in the ink on the shirt. So it's something that you need to be careful and you need to be thoughtful about. So if you have a children's shirt and you're adding an imprint, you have to think about CPSIA. So it's the lead paint rule that you're going to have to think about. So if the ink can be scraped off the garment, the limit is 90 parts per million. If the imprint becomes part of the garment, then the limit goes to 100 parts per million of lead, but testing is required. So I guess when you're thinking about it, it gets a little, there's a certain amount of anxiety that comes into the situation where you're talking about decorating the shirts and what do I do? Well, the vast majority of the shirt orders you process are very likely adult garments, not children's garments. And for those, I would say, exercise due care and make no changes. Continue to work with whatever screen printer you're working with whatever system works for you. But when it comes to children's garments, you may want to segregate those products out from the regular pattern of decorating garments, because when you go to your screen printer and you talk to them about CPSIA, they may or they may not be familiar with that law. And my guess is probably 75% of the real small screen printers are not prepared to be compliant with CPSIA. So you may need to move those decorating processes to a compliant shop. But you can absolutely keep all your adult-sized garments there because they would be fine. I hope that makes sense. Now, in addition to the imprint on the shirt, you also need to be thinking about the bling on the shirt, because those lead limits apply to the decoration as well. So those would need to be tested to make sure they don't have high levels of lead. They need to be, make sure that there aren't any small parts, sharp points, sharp edges. And so, again, you want to be working with a decorator that is really familiar with CPSIA and is able to ensure that the products they're delivering back to you are compliant. So we're talking about lead, but it's not just lead that we need to think about. We need to think about phthalates, too. So again, when we went through Product Safety 101, we talked about CPSIA and the lead limits. And then if it's a child care article, you need to consider phthalates. So those would be apparel intended for ages 3 and under. So be thinking about things like baby blankets, sleep mats, bibs, onesies, those kinds of things. You need to make sure no phthalates are in the item, or within, none of the 6-band phthalates are in it in excess of the limits. Phthalates are a plasticizing agent. A phthalate is a chemical that's added to the product to make the plastic softer, to make it bendable, so it'll bend without breaking. So it's something that's added to make plastic soft. So you'll find it in things like Velcro or vinyl. Velcro, vinyl, zippers, buttons, clasps, and rhinestones. The other thing that you need to be thoughtful about when it comes to things like onesies would be the snaps, to make sure that there's no lead in the snaps higher than 100 parts per million, and if those snaps are actually coated with any sort of surface coating, that surface coating doesn't exceed 90 parts per million of lead. So what can you do when it comes to apparel to make sure that you're handling everything properly without losing your mind? Well, first, like I said, there is no need to change how you handle adult garment decorations. So when it comes to the children's garments, work with a screen printer or a decorator who's compliant with CPSIA expectations. Either they've tested their inks or they have test reports from their ink suppliers that they are really confident with any sorts of bling that they're adding to the product, that those have been tested as well. Make sure that someone's performing third-party tests on the finished product, or you're relying on the component parts test rule of each piece is being tested and all of those tests are being maintained and collected together. And then issuing the CPC, the Children's Product Certificate, based on all of those test reports. We have a number of best practices on our website that should be able to help you walk through the process. So beyond the testing and the compliance portion of apparel, now we need to think about tracking labels. So we've talked about tracking labels in the past in Product Safety 101, that if you have a children's product, you need to include the tracking label. And the tracking label is designed to enable a recall to happen effectively. So for that, it would be, the example I used before is the jar of peanut butter in the pantry. You just, if there's a recall, you compare the lot number on that jar to the lot that's been recalled to know whether or not you can continue to use peanut butter. That works for the peanut butter. The shirt itself, the undecorated shirt, it's going to come with a tracking label on it. If you're working with any of the, major apparel providers in the industry, that tracking label would help enable the recall of all of those, red, medium-sized T-shirts. But now you're making a material change by adding an imprint to the shirt. So think about that Canadian screen printer. You wouldn't want to recall all of those shirts because there was nothing wrong with the shirts. The only problem was with the imprinted shirts. And that's why you need to add the tracking label to the imprinted shirt to ensure you can do a recall of just the shirt with the imprint, not all the shirts. So when you're making the material change to the garment by sending the children's T-shirt off to the screen printer, you're going to need to make sure a secondary tracking label has been added to the shirt. And if you used embroidery rather than a screen print, most embroidery is exempt from third-party testing because they're kind of natural threads that you're using, but you would still need to have the secondary tracking label on it. So how do you handle the tracking label? Well, you have all the standard required information. You have to have the distributor or decorator's name on it, the month and year the decoration was applied, the city and state where the decoration was applied, a batch or internal order number so that you can isolate the specific shirts that were decorated, and contact information. Where do you put it? Well, there are a couple of places to put it. You can put that tracking label either in the bottom hemline or in the inside back label or sewn in as a label behind or near the original care or tracking label. But that's a lot of information to add to the shirt. And as much as possible, you don't want to add more than you have to. So we created our tracking label solution. And that's an online option. And what you can do is you would go to our website, and anyone who has a UPIC can use this. And then you just complete the registration form. So you create a unique identifier that you would append to the URL. So it would be the http://ps.ppa.org/, and then you'd add your unique identifier to that URL. Then you, in the database, you put the location of production, date of production, identifying characteristics, and contact information. And then we would hang on to that for you in our database. So when it came time to printing the tracking label on the garment as a secondary imprint, you wouldn't have to include all of that information. You would only have to print the URL, the ppa.org/, and your unique identifier plus your company name. And then when you go to the internet, you can just type that in, and all the product tracking information that you see in your screen, that will show up. So that complies with the CPSIA expectations as it relates to tracking labels. And that's all that you would have to add to the product, which helps a little bit. And so you could use that URL plus the company name and the unique identifier and print that either in the back seam or around the collar. Some people even can incorporate it into the logo itself, and that's often the easiest way to do it because you don't need a second screen in that case. If you're working with a smaller client, maybe it's an elementary school for a field day, they probably wouldn't have a problem with including that information in the logo or the design itself on the T-shirt because it's not like they're protecting a logo, and this way it won't cost them extra money in most cases. So that might be something to consider. There are no specific rules as far as font size or color, so you could try to make it blend in as long as it's legible on the decorated part of the shirt. And then the last thing that I want to mention as it relates to apparel is drawstrings. And I know you've heard me say this before, but there have been so many recalls, and they continue. You don't want to see any drawstrings on children's upper outerwear. So that would be any drawstring around on the hood, around the neck, around the waist, on a jacket or a sweatshirt, because it poses a strangulation hazard. It's easy to detect. This is a picture of a raincoat that was recalled this past fall because of the drawstring around the waist. So you can't have those things. You have to make sure that you're not ordering children's upper outerwear with any sort of drawstrings. It's easy to spot. It's easy to find the violation of the regulation. You don't need any expensive equipment to see the drawstring, and so you just need to make sure that you are not sourcing any children's upper outerwear with drawstrings. There are also rules as it relates to pants. They vary a little bit, but in general, I would say avoid any drawstrings associated with children's products. These rules do not apply to adult garments. So that takes us through the apparel portion of the presentation, and now I want to cover writing instruments, because that's another really big category for our industry. And for this, I have some really good news, and that is, in most cases, pens are considered general use items, and you don't have to worry about the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act as it relates to pens. Even if the pens are sold in school stores, back-to-school bins, have the school logo or the mascot on it. So we and the Writing Instrument Manufacturers Association approached the CPSC when CPSIA first came out and asked for an exemption on ballpoint pens, because the tip of a ballpoint pen is actually made of brass and it has lead in excess of the CPSIA limits. And without that exception, we were concerned that those products would not be able to be made available to children anymore. So we approached and asked for an exemption. That exemption was actually denied, but what we did get is what's called the WEMA rule in product safety circles. And that was a letter from the then General Counsel of the CPSIA, Cheryl Falvey, saying, in most cases, pens are considered to be general use items. They're as appealing to adults and teachers as they are to the children in the school. They're not intended primarily for use by those children, and therefore you can continue to sell those pens in the back-to-school bins just like you see every year in the school store or with the school logo on it. So that's really good news for our industry. Of course, you have to be thoughtful about it, because if those pens have really playful elements on them, they have play value, the licensing or theme has made it so an adult would be mortified to use it in public, that pen could be transformed into a children's product. In that case, you want to not use the ballpoint pen, but you would want to use a felt tip pen or some other pen of that sort. And there's still lots of due care required as it relates to writing instruments. There are rules that relate to art supplies, to extractable lead, even to wood with the Lacey Act. So do your due diligence. These are a couple on the screen. The logos are a couple of the bodies that will vet pens and writing instruments and art materials. So you want to look for those kind of logos when you're sourcing the products to just make sure you're exercising your due care. But in general, in the area of pens, we're in pretty good shape, and it's not something that you really need to be overly concerned about. Electronics, however, is a completely different conversation. Electronics have become a huge category in our industry. More and more, it's a category that's growing. Sales are huge, and the product category is really it's compelling, but it's also incredibly complicated. So, primarily when it relates to electronics, some of the things we need to think about are battery ingestion. Incidents are often life-threatening. There are rules about packaging and actually let's just focus really more on lithium batteries than anything else for this conversation, because we have a number of other webinars and best practices that relate to electronics in general, but lithium ion batteries are really becoming more and more of an issue within our industry. There are specific rules that focus on how you package them, how many can be in a box, how many boxes you can have shipped together. If they overheat, they can burst into flames. There have been a number of recalls as it relates to lithium-ion batteries. I know that in the UK right now they're having a significant number of lithium-ion batteries recalls and incidents of significant fire events as it relates to electronic cigarettes and the chargers that go with those electronic cigarettes. But it's that challenge related to the chargers that you have to be thoughtful about. There are new risks as they relate to air transportation. Sometimes there can be defects in manufacturing that can make a product vulnerable to significant failure down the line. And then there are challenges related to end-of-life disposal as well. So the biggest thing to keep in mind with any sort of tech product is this is not a product category where you want to look for a deal. Looking for the lowest price here could really end up being a very, very costly mistake. What you want to make sure you're doing is exercising due care and due diligence and really asking that the appropriate steps be taken as it relates to electronics. When I say don't look for the best deal, testing for lead in a product is going to cost maybe $100. Testing lithium-ion batteries thoroughly is going to cost you several $1,000s. And so you have to expect that that testing cost at some point is going to be reflected in the sales price. So just be looking at it. If it looks too good to be true, do a lot of due diligence before you decide to take that next step. So with lithium-ion batteries, the risks relate to overvoltage, overcurrent, or over temperature. There can also be hazards related to something going wrong inside the battery or an external force causing a problem with it. I was recently traveling and I was checking my bags in, and this was a screen that came up. And if you look at it, we look at the hazardous materials all the time. Well, they added a new element, and that is the lithium-ion battery. So if you look at the little lightning bolt on the lower right-hand corner of your screen, you're going to see the battery and the little, drill. Well, that's saying, do you have any lithium-ion batteries that you have in your carry-on or in your luggage? So you can take your lithium-ion batteries in your carry-on, but you shouldn't put them in your checked luggage. It's actually against the rules to put them in your checked luggage now, and this is a message that's slowly getting out. And the reason is that should there be a fire incident or overheating related to lithium-ion batteries, the fire suppression system in the baggage compartment of a plane is not equipped to extinguish that kind of fire. So you need to make sure you have it in your carry-on bag, so should anything happen, the flight attendants have all been trained on how to extinguish those kinds of fires. So it's not, chemicals don't put that kind of fire out. It has to be lots and lots of water that puts that fire out. So just keep that in mind next time you're traveling. Pull all the lithium-ion batteries out of your checked luggage and just make sure you take them in your carry-on. When it comes to sourcing the products, there are all sorts of tests that you need. We've been working with UL quite a bit over the past 6 months to try to wrap our heads around all the different rules. So UL has one set of tests that relate to lithium-ion batteries and electronics in general. There are other organizations that have similar tests and similar standards. So you want to just be making sure you do your homework to make sure that the right test was done for the right product in the right marketplace. And if you look at this, they have expectations for battery packs, for chargers and adapters, for any sort of Bluetooth device, for the battery adapters in a car, and even for laser pointers, there are certain expectations. So when you're sourcing this product, just be sure that you're asking all the right questions of your partner, whether it's your promotional product supplier or it's your original manufacturer, to make sure that they're doing the right things as it relates to this product category. Rosia, do we have any questions coming in so far that would be appropriate to answer at this point, or would you like me to just continue to run through the different product categories we have?
Yeah, I don't have any questions posted at the moment.
Okay.
But yeah, so I guess we can continue. But please, anyone, please feel free to ask any questions.
Okay, great. I hesitate sometimes because I know I talk quickly and I'm covering a lot of categories and I don't want to confuse or alarm anyone unnecessarily. And if we can do questions when they come up, that would be fine with me.
Okay,
So,
no problem. Thanks.
So what do we do when we're talking about the electronic category? Well, tech products, particularly lithium-ion products, are going to be an emerging compliance challenge. Don't be overwhelmed. Don't be scared. Just make sure you educate yourself so you can exercise your due care. And you exercise your due care by asking the right questions and demand the testing documentation. The other thing I hear again and again from the CPSC is every time you make a significant decision about compliance, about, well, I wasn't sure about what to do in this case, and I decided to do X, Y, or Z, create a little memo to file. And that's kind of a legal term of write a note to yourself. You want to document your thought process because that shows that you were thoughtful and deliberate in making a specific decision. And so should someone come back and say, you know, what is your compliance program pen like? Do you have a compliance manual? What kind of files do you have? You can actually pull out like your own decision process. And while it may not have been the right decision based on the ultimate outcome of that decision, it shows that at that point with the information you had at hand at that time, you were being thoughtful and deliberate, and that will go a long way towards protecting you from excess penalties should you end up in a bad situation. So, you know, it's a memo to file. Anytime you make a significant decision as it relates to compliance that you want to have part of your process going forward, just write a memo to file, write a letter to yourself, and hang on to it. So I went from a really complicated category to a really easy category for luggage and bags. And the good news is, when it comes to luggage and bags, there are really no federal regulatory requirements, unless the item is intended to hold food, and then some FDA requirements would apply. Now, if it's a children's product, obviously CPSIA will continue to be an issue on that. You need to make sure that product's tested for lead compliance, maybe some other elements. Make sure that it has the tracking label. For adult bags, though, there are no federal requirements. So I say this, and I say it's good news, but I also know most of you are now thinking, well, what about the grocery bag recall from a few years ago? There were grocery bags that were recalled in Florida from Wegmans and Publix and a couple of other grocery stores. Those bags actually weren't violating any sort of regulatory standard. What happened in that case was a reporter from the Tampa Tribune had an XRF gun and tested those bags and found lead at some level higher than what the children's standard was at the time in those bags. And then it became a target of media scrutiny. And that's what triggered the recall more than anything else, was the publicity surrounding the test results of those bags. But the bags themselves were not out of compliance with any federal standard because there was no standard as it related to lead for those products. There was also a pretty high-profile recall of lunch bags in California a few years ago, many years ago actually, and those were vinyl lunch bags that were being distributed to actually underprivileged kids in California. And what happened with those was they were violating the Prop 65 warning. So they had lead levels in excess of the California Safe Harbor levels, and they weren't being labeled properly with the warning. And that's what triggered that recall and costly settlement as it relates to Prop 65. So when I talk about all of these different categories, I'm focusing on the federal standards on them. But regardless of what category we're talking about, we always have to be thinking about Prop 65 as well, because if it goes into California, that rule is not preempted by any federal rule. So if any product being distributed in California has any of the chemicals that are considered to be hazardous in California, that product has to be labeled. So if you haven't taken the Prop 65 course yet, I'm making your head spin. I apologize for that, and I would encourage you to listen to that webinar, because just even tackling Prop 65, it's at least a 30-minute discussion on that. But do keep it in mind regardless of the product category. So the next category I want to talk about today is going to be health and safety products. And for those labeling concerns are going to be an issue. So it's things like cosmetics or over-the-counter drugs. And then you need to have display panels that talk about the identity of the product and the weight of the product. So the first thing we need to talk about is you have to be able to decide whether the product is a drug or a cosmetic in the eyes of the FDA, because that makes a big difference. A drug is defined as a product intended to treat or prevent disease. So some examples of a drug in the eyes of the FDA would be sunscreen, dandruff shampoo, acne treatment, antiperspirants, anything that makes a claim to treat or to prevent something. Cosmetics, on the other hand, they don't make a claim to treat or prevent anything. They're for cleansing, beautifying, making someone more attractive, altering the appearance. And so the rules that apply to each of these, for a drug, the rules are significantly higher than the rules for a cosmetic. So more examples of a cosmetic would be things like moisturizers, perfume, lipstick, nail polish, cleansing shampoos. So you'll see it's not an anti-dandruff shampoo, it's a cleansing shampoo. So one is a drug and one is a cosmetic. So how do you tell the difference? Well, drugs make claims, cosmetics do not. So lip balm is a claim. Lip moisturizer is not. It's possible to be both a drug and a cosmetic, but if it's a drug, well, if it's a drug or a cosmetic, you have to follow FDA compliance as it relates to labeling, but the drug labeling is going to be significantly more complicated. So if you're making or sourcing items that will qualify as drugs or cosmetics, so in this industry I'm really talking about hand sanitizer and lip balm more than anything else, you need to follow the rules as it relates to labeling. So for a lip moisturizer or a cosmetic, this is what a label might look like. You know, you have to have the name of the product, you have to have the weight of the product on it. You need to have some other information. You need to have contact information about, you know, who distributed it, a website, and customer service number. But it's not a whole lot when it's a cosmetic. So if you're looking at lip moisturizer, this is the kind of label you'll see. But if you're talking about lip balm, then you need to actually have a lot more information on it. You would actually have to have all of this information that's based on the 2011 final rule as it relates to over-the-counter drugs. And so all that information under the drug facts, that needs to be added to the label on the product. And it makes it complicated, because that's a lot of information to be adding to a relatively small product, and a lot of people in our industry have had to be pretty creative. So very often you're going to see one label stuck on top of another label to reduce the footprint of the labeling. Or if you're looking at a lip balm, you might see that label wrapped around the entire lip balm, so you see part of the label, but you can also see the logo. Because regardless of the size of the container, it has to be labeled properly. So if you have a lip moisturizer, but it's in a lip balm tube with a claim about sun protection, it's an over-the-counter drug, so it needs to include all the information. The entire monograph needs to be included on that lip balm. And we have lots of information on our website about this and best practices. But again, when you're sourcing either hand sanitizer or lip balm, you want to make sure your supplier knows what the rules are and they're including the proper monograph on the product so that it complies with FDA regulations. Then we'll get into drinkware real quick. Most of the items in drinkware do not fall under the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. So the only things that would be in drinkware would be things specifically intended for children 12 and under. Sippy cups, baby bottles, pacifiers, all of those kinds of things you need to think about. But in most cases, drinkware, you're going to be thinking about FDA regulations instead, because they do have guidelines for ceramic drinking vessels and anything that comes in contact with food. So a food contact substance is considered anything that is intended for use as a component in transporting, packing, packaging, holding food. So if you have any product that would come in contact with food, you would want to make sure that you used only a chemical or substance that's considered by the FDA to be generally recognized as safe, or GRAS. And that would be something like, you know, stainless steel is considered to be generally recognized as safe. So they have a list of those kinds of products. Beyond FDA expectations when it relates to drinkware, this is a big category of enforcement and scrutiny by Prop 65 bounty hunters. They look at any ceramicware that's externally decorated. They look at aluminum cookware. They look at beverage containers, anything with brass, because as you remember from our pen discussion, brass has lead in it. Any sort of glasses, any sort of leaded crystal, water bottles, soft beverage containers made with PVC. So remember that Prop 65 is not a testing rule, it's just a labeling rule. So you need to find out if any of the 900 chemicals considered to cause cancer or birth defects by the state of California are being added to the drinkware, and if they are, just make sure you include that Prop 65 warning to keep yourself out of trouble. Now, beyond regulations when it comes to drinkware, there are also quality and performance standards. So you just want to make sure that the product's going to work properly. There was a recall of Starbucks mugs. I don't know if you guys remember this. And this was, again, a number of years ago. But they were these really cute Starbucks mugs that people were getting. Well, when you added a hot beverage to the mug, it actually weakened the glue that held the handle to the mug itself. They would separate, and the hot liquid could spill all over you, causing burns. So obviously there had to be a recall of those mugs. Well, the reason that that's something that would be tested not under a federal standard or an FDA standard, that would be a quality performance. So you just want to make sure that you're working with and sourcing from suppliers who know what they're doing their homework, and they're doing the testing, not just necessarily to what the federal standards are, but also testing for quality and performance over time. So I told you I was going to talk quickly, and we got through all of the big product categories I wanted to talk about, and we still have really a lot of time for questions, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you guys have as it relates to CPSIA, as it relates to Prop 65, as it relates to any of these product categories, or any category that I haven't addressed in this that might pertain to your business. I would also encourage you to go through all of our product safety resources on the website. We have a lot of really good information. We have compliance manuals, we have best practices, we have different tools that hopefully will make your life a little easier. And then you can always call me if you have any questions at all, or just shoot me an email. So, Lucia, do we have any questions?
Yep, one just popped up from Dave Geffert. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. He wants to know, has the sample undue influence policy web link been updated?
Yes, it has, Dave. Thank you for asking. We recently revised our website, and we reorganized everything, and I didn't necessarily update all of my webinar links to make sure they matched with the new website. So yes, that change has been made.
Okay, great, thank you. And please, if anyone has any questions at the moment, let us know. But for now, I think, Anne, that's it. I don't have anything else. If you guys have wished to review some of the other webinars that have taken place already, they have been recorded. They are on our YouTube channel. So if you want to review them, they're available. This one is also being recorded at the moment. So if you have anything that you want to look over, it will be uploaded to our channel tomorrow. Anyone else? Any more questions? Oh, Donna Lapinto. She wants to know if we can get this resource page via email.
Absolutely. I will send this to you, Rocio, and if you could just forward it to all the attendees who are on the line. And the main resource that you need for this, more than anything else, is just the PPAI.org site. And from there, you just go to product safety and just pick product responsibility, and you're going to see just a wealth of resources. But I will be happy to send that to Rocio to pass on to everyone on the call. And I'll also send you a PDF of this presentation.
Okay, sounds great. So then I'll send them out to everyone who was on today's webinar. Okay. Any further questions?
Great. Well, I'm happy to give you all 15 minutes of your life back. Thank you for your time and attention today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of this information with all of you. And I'm always here to answer any questions, so should you have any at all, just reach out to me. It's annel@ppai.org, so ANNEL@ppai.org.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anne, for sharing this information for us, with us. If anyone else has questions, you can email Anne, you can email me, call me. Again, thank you all for attending and for giving us a few minutes of your time. Okay, have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.